Hey, this is Dr. J talking to you about another one of Randall's rousing tweets.
Okay, so Dr. J. That's a cool name, right? Dr. J. This is Kurt Gyrus. He is, well, I know Kurt as the co-host of Mike Lacona's Risen Jesus podcast. He's the one asking the questions of Dr. Mike Lacona. So, yay for Kurt. Not many people know that he actually has a PhD in his own right. So good for you for branching out and starting your own YouTube channel. I was excited to find it. And he is talking about a rousing tweet, and that is in reference to Randall Rouser, who is a theology professor at a college in Edmonton, Alberta, not far from where I used to live, and the home of the greatest hockey team that there is. Well, that's not true, but my favorite hockey team, and home of the best players in the league. How about that? I don't know. Anyway, home of the Oilers. Randall Rouser versus Kurt Giles. So this is a Christian versus Christian fight, everybody.
And this time around, it deals with atheists and whether the existence of God is obvious. Randall shared a tweet of Mike Winger. It's a clip of multiple times of Mike talking about how the existence of God is obvious. It's self-evident.
So for some reason, Kurt didn't include the actual clip in his video. He just described the clip. And I think that's a shame because I went and looked again with my source methodology. I went and looked and found the actual clip, and it's hilarious. So let's watch.
People know there's a God. Common sense. So you're suppressing it. Truth of God is just obvious. It's obvious that there's a God. God has shown them. We're not agnostic. Just life experience tells you there's a God. Yeah. It's obvious. It's obvious. Okay, there must be a God. I mean, it's just common sense. It's obvious that there's a God because there's a us. God makes sense. It's really just common sense. I think it's just plain common sense. And I'll say, or it's common sense. You look at the clouds and the days going around. If something started all this, there had to be a God. Like, it's just common sense. You have to go to college to stop believing this. You are fighting hard, suppressing that truth. There's a God and you know it. Common sense. You don't need a degree in philosophy to show that God exists. We're here. God exists. But in the end, they're just suppressing the truth. I'm scared for you. Creation shaking its fist at the creator. There shouldn't be any atheists. It's irrational. There are really atheists. They're just they're darkened hearts and futile thoughts that have brought them to that point. This is a big, giant claim.
And
Good job, non-alchemist. That was hilarious. I thought it was a great supercut of Mike Winger just defending his God just by saying, it's obvious. Look at the trees. There you go. All right. So Kurt Giles is he decided to weigh in on this. I'll let him tell the tale.
Randall takes issue with this. And so I shared a verse from Psalm 19, the previous verse. The heavens declare the glory of God, right? And the creation just reveals knowledge about God. Well, Randall takes issue with this. And so he took issue with the fact that I proof texted. So he says,
so for those of you who don't know what proof texting is, that's what happens when in the Christian circles where you take whatever position you want and you find verses that support it. And that they may be in context, maybe not be, but you use the Bible as your justification. In the Christian circles, using the Bible is justification, right? That's what you're ultimately looking for. I don't care if science says it. I don't care if a scholar says it. If the Bible says it, we can justify it. And proof texting is where you pull a verse out of your hat to back the pony the ideological pony that you have right at that moment. I used to have a game going early days of my channel where I would actually have people write in and write a position, and I would find proof texts for both the yay and the nay answer to the question. And it's remarkably easy to find Bible verses to back the yes and no position on almost any question. All that said, that was just to explain proof texting. But when we're talking about atheists, which is what this whole thing is about, an atheist obviously is not going to value the weight and force of a Bible verse in the context of the conversation you're having. Kurt jumps in. I'm going to here's a Bible verse backing my position. And Randall wants to say, well, you know what? We're talking to non-believers right now. So maybe your proof texting doesn't help.
Sharing my tweet, Christians often defend the claim that atheists are in rebellion against God by proof texting a few Bible verses. But what if the prisoners of Auschwitz couldn't see the skies pouring forth knowledge because they were obscured by the puffing smokestacks of incinerating bodies? Randall,
Okay, so the first sentence there made sense. That was absolutely Randall saying, look, and for those who don't know, Professor Rouser considers himself a Christian. I know some people take exception to that. I don't. He calls himself a Christian. So I call him a Christian. So it's Christian, a Christian fight. And he's just pointing out, hey, we're talking to atheists right now. Maybe your verse isn't helping. I do not know what the point of the saying was. Well, maybe the people looking out from Auschwitz couldn't see the sky because the smoke was covering it. That seemed weird. And I don't think we ever get closure on it, but that's fine.
here is really trying to touch a nerve with folks. He's pulling on really emotional chords. And
Maybe.
the reason why this is not a good argument is because exceptions don't disprove the rule.
No, it's not a good argument because it's not a good argument, but exceptions do disprove rules. If you have, or at least makes you change the rule. And here's the thing, Kurt, in the context of what we're talking about, you want to talk about, where am I? Nope, we're right here. We're in Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1 in, around, you guys know where it is. Romans 1:20 and thereabouts. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, been understood from what was been made, so that people are without excuse. No one has an excuse because of nature. So that is the rule. And then the rest of this passage basically affirms for a Christian that we are, depending on the Christian who are, but for many, that we're just suppressing the truth and righteousness. So if there are non-resistant non-believers, and if there are people who can know their own thoughts well enough to know that they are not suppressing that truth, they can absolutely toss out what Romans 1:20. This is actually the heart of the pivot of my channel, was me being frustrated with people quoting Romans 1:20 at me. I know my thoughts better than the Bible does. Sorry, I just do. The content of my own thoughts is the only thing I can know for sure. So if you want to throw a Bible verse at me, and that's counteracting the one thing I can know for certain, then sorry, your Bible's not helpful here, and it is not going to therefore be an authority for anything else. Exceptions, if you have an absolute rule, do disprove the rule. So you can't wander around saying, all swans are white. And I say, but there's a black one. And you say, no, exceptions don't prove the rule. All swans are white, even though there's an exception there. No, exceptions do disprove rules. Then you need to change your rule and say, most swans are white. As a rule of thumb, no longer an actual hard and fast rule. This is a silly thing to say, and it's sad.
Furthermore, he says, what if? What if this or what if that? Well, whataboutism is not an argument.
Pointing out exceptions to a rule is not whataboutism, though. You're whataboutisming with whataboutism. So whataboutism is the technique or practice of responding to an accusation or difficult question by making a counter-accusation, saying, oh no, what about you? Or raising a different issue. The whole point of whataboutism is you are distracting from, you're no longer addressing the point being made. That's why I call it that. Pointing out exceptions to a rule, saying, hey, there's a black swan over here, so your white swan rule doesn't seem to be good, is not whataboutism. That's pointing out an exception. That's actually arguing the point.
Against the position that there are truths that can be obviously known. Let me demonstrate why we should think this is the case. If I said it's obvious that the sky is blue, it's obvious that the sky is blue. And Randall comes along and says, well, what about blind people? What about blind people? It's not obvious to them. Well, that's fair. It's not obvious to them.
Yeah, that's right. If you want to say, first of all, saying the sky is blue is weird because right now the sky at my house is black. And an hour ago, it was kind of a lovely orange-pink hue. Earlier in the day, it was kind of gray. Like, the sky is not always blue. But let's just say let's set all that aside and say in a moment where you're picking a location at a time where the sky is blue and you want to say it's obvious. And if, Kurt, your position is that it is obvious to every human who has ever lived that the sky is blue, and someone says, it's not actually because it isn't as obvious to a blind person, that is an attack on the obviousness of it. It is not an attack on whether the sky is blue. So, again, you may want to be saying that maybe you're the kind of person that says, well, Romans 1:20 doesn't say that it's obvious to everyone that there's a God. But that's what Romans 1:20 is used for by a lot of Christians, bludgeoningly, and how this whole thread started.
But it doesn't mean that it's not obvious to everybody else that the.
So, for everyone for whom the sky is blue is obvious, it's obvious that the sky is blue. Kurt, you've created a tautology that is useless. When we're going to strap this later to God, for everyone for whom God is obvious, it's obvious that there is a God. And the fact that there's some people for whom it's not obvious, those are exceptions. That doesn't disprove the rule. No, it means you've created a stupid tautology that means nothing. I'm going to beat this horse a little bit. For everyone for whom God is obvious, it's obvious that God exists. That doesn't help anybody.
Sky is blue. Okay, so this whataboutism doesn't defeat the position that it's obviously true that the sky is blue.
No. Well, it absolutely defeats the position that the sky is obviously blue to everyone, and makes useless your assertion that for those for whom the sky is obviously blue, the sky is obviously blue. Now, the thing about the sky being blue is that the sky isn't blue because it's obvious. That's actually not what we would appeal to. That you may appeal to how everyone comes to accept it incredibly quickly, but we understand enough about light that we know that the wave frequency, there's a certain range that we generally call blue. And of course, each person, let's not even get into the qualia of it, whether we're all experiencing blue the same, because that doesn't matter, because we'll be able to say mathematically, there's a certain range of frequencies that we want to define as blue. And we want to say, hey, is what's being reflected from the sky right now, does it fall into that range? And there are many instruments that have nothing to do with humans that we can use to test that. And we can test whether the light that is being reflected from the sky right now at this point in time, this point of the day, falls in that spectrum. Then we would say, yeah, it's blue. And we could explain that to a person who's blind, who's never even seen the color blue, and they would be accepted because we would know what the definition of blue is, and we can measure light. This is not analogous to God, where the only way, Kurt, because I watched ahead, and if we watched Mike Winger say it for a minute and a half, the way you know God is just because it's obvious. Intuition is the entire way we know it. And so, again, weird to say, for everyone who intuits a God, God is intuitive. Not helpful. Especially not helpful for those who think that by not accepting this proposition, not just intuiting this proposition, you're going to burn in hell forever. That kind of sucks.
Now, we can have empathy for people in their situations where things are not so obvious.
Oh, thank you for having empathy for me, that God isn't obvious for me. And you're just going to look, oh man, it's really sad that Paulogia, his intuition isn't the same. So he's going to burn in hell. That's too bad.
requires a certain analysis of the problem in order to provide a remedy to the problem.
So it's not clearly just I'm broken in some way. Might need to remedy my non-intuition about God. We need to look into the reasons why I'm not intuiting God and try and fix why I'm not intuiting God. Why aren't we trying to actually have evidence for God? That we don't need to have this intuition about it.
So we should be caring, but we also need to understand the problem. And what I'm suggesting here is that
To be clear, atheists are the problem. But they don't count. The fact that atheists exist don't wreck the rule that every single person intuits this. Don't let exceptions make Christians feel. So the thing about the Romans 1:20 is this is real. When you're and proof texting, it's all just actually to make Christians feel better, because Christians want to say, well, why that guy seems like he's reasonably smart, and he can put his shoes on, and he can drive around town and earn enough money to live, and he doesn't think God is real. What? How do I explain that? And it's like, well, now we're throwing a Bible verse at you just to make you feel better about this. And that's all